I also noticed there are very few windows because he needed more wall space. He covered.
They were on sliders.
Yeah. Anyway, he
It's really
passed away in
very
his late 50s from complications of diabetes. It was quite sad, but
He's too young.
he's too young to go. But Jerry, actually, the Art Institute mounted a major exhibition of his collection with a catalog. I don't know if the catalog is still available or not, but anyway.
Somewhere it is.
Yeah.
I missed a beat. Who are you talking about? Who's
Jerry
the?
Elliott.
Pardon me?
Jerry Elliott.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. We're talking about how one's taste eventually, unless you are, quite wealthy, outstrips your pocketbook. And I was mentioning
I got that point.
but I couldn't have, I didn't feel comfortable buying a $400,000 textile from Michael Francis on a deal. And Jerry had that happen to him at auction when the Shaw of Iran outbid him.
Oh, I heard that part. I just didn't know who the player was.
There are a few.
Jerry Elliott's collection. It's fabulous.
Yeah.
There are a few collectors, quite major collectors, who stopped collecting the very expensive work, and I don't think it was because of financial issues, and they started collecting postcards. So I think Anthony Dauphin has a very large postcard collection. And I think one of the major Indian miniature collectors also kind of diverted his attention to collecting postcards. So maybe it's not just out of financial consideration.
Oh, well, what happened to me, my beautiful moon eaters, the turquoise faces, I fell in love with one in a major book about a major collection and started collecting and falling across them and finding them and whatever, and they kept going up in price. There is a French collector who wanted to trade me for one of his, but it was ridiculous, and I said no, and that's the day after 3 wonderful ones became available. And I quit collecting moon eaters. I mean, I made the market.
Yeah, the other thing is we had a major collection of Chinese Ming period furniture.
Oh.
We don't talk about
and
it.
2000,
Oh.
and we sold most of it, not all of it, but most of it in Hong Kong when I, discovered how I went up 1,000, 1,200% over above what we paid for it. But what bothered me the most was having to worry about the humidity in this house during the wintertime. And when we came back from France once in February, and I had seen one of the top boards of one of the tables had shrunk. And I said, that's it, finished, I'm getting rid of this. I cannot have this stuff get ruined during my time as custodian because you don't own this. And it went to Hong Kong and we turned it into an apartment in New York.
Whoa.
Fantastic. I think everybody who's going to be here is here. We have no props this time. I have to
What?
think.
Joseph has a prop.
What?
Joseph held up a prop.
Oh, well, I've still got, I've got my prop from the other day, It's still,
I still have this one.
I never showed you my elephants.
Oh,
I'll go get my elephants.
Anu.
hi, Anu.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Anu.
Hi.
Soma, I'm looking forward to this preview. I'll be so well educated by the end of the week. I have Avalokiteshvara.
Oh, how sweet.
Oh,
Not a very good one, just a tourist one.
They're
but
all good. They're all
sweet.
good.
we're doing a spontaneous, I have a prop in my hand, unplanned. So let's see okay. So everybody's running off to.
Elephants.
These are my elephants. And I have no idea where they, I mean, I know where they came from in my, in that they were in the sunroom in my grandfather's house in Highland Park. But I have no idea how they got there. I am suspicious that that actually is ivory, that the tugs are made out of, an ebony
Let's
probably.
see
for
what
them.
everybody
Anyway,
has,
that's where those are my elephants.
I
My,
have another.
my problem remains is that I can't hit all 3 buttons to take a screenshot and
Oh.
hold something at the same time.
All right.
Even with these
That's
extra
good.
fingers.
Ooh,
It's made
So
out
someone
of.
else can do it. Someone else hit Command Shift.
I'll do it.
I know you
Return.
have such another sculpture.
who's doing it?
Command Shift 3 should do
I'll do
it.
it. Are we ready? Command Shift. Barbara, you're up. 1, 2. Let's check. Yeah, we're perfect.
This
Document.
elephant is made out of elephant poo.
Oh,
Oh,
Cabinet.
Paper mache.
So I found this group of 3 little sculptures at Primitive. I haven't seen anything like them before. They're Nepalese, they're women because you can see the breasts, but they all have heads of animals. So this one is a lion, and there's a cow and a rat. And I found them really kind of charming and unusual.
They're the condom that appear in the Book of the Dead.
Oh,
They are the dancing female deities that dance, that you see at the very end of conscious existence. You see them dancing right on that edge.
we have to do one more picture. Diane is here now. Could we hold it up again? Would that be okay?
yep.
Oh,
Perfect.
we all hold them up.
1, 2, ready?
This is spontaneous, Diane.
That's right. Okay. She's giving me the blessings. I need them. The Abhay Mudra. I need those blessings today.
Okay,
Okay, we're good. I got it.
all righty.
This is an extra Abhaya Mudra for you.
I'm going to have to stop the video fairly in probably about half an hour because we have to go driving off again. So but I'll
Okay,
still
well,
carry on listening, just so you know.
Where are you, Alexander?
I'm on Cape Cod again,
Okay.
back to the Cape, yeah. It's for another week, and then back to New York.
Nice, enjoy.
well,
you.
everyone, I'm glad you're here, and thank you all for a spectacular birthday party. I love you all, but I don't need to introduce Soma. I will say that I am absolutely addicted to her presentations, her voice, her aesthetic, the details she chooses to highlight. So I jumped at having her do another presentation. It's all yours.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to be able to share this with you. And Joseph, the pen you brought up, it's really cool. It's from the Latin word for feather, penna, because that's what they used to use to make pens. So can everybody see this?
Yep.
So this is part of the presentation that the Nourishment Project is doing on the Silk Roads over the summer, hosted by the Women's Athletic Club. We've done the first 2 series. First one was on flora and fauna. The second one was on luxury textiles. And continuing on this one, this is a preview for the one that I'll be doing on Thursday, is on illuminated manuscripts. So last month, we had talked about how the silk carpets were a major luxury textile industry of the Silk Road. This one, a very similar one, is also at LACMA. And the same, this singular ornamentation, the geometry of them shows up in the Book of Kells. This is the one picture of one page from the Book of Kells, which is in the Trinity Library in Dublin. And another great rare manuscript is from the Morgan Library, the devotional book of Claude de France. It's, as you can see, it's tiny. It's 2 3/4 by 2 inches, very small. It's at the Morgan. And such rare books you will find in both the San Gall Library in Switzerland and at the Beinecke in Yale. They have rare book collections of repute. And that is the focus of today's presentation, illuminated manuscripts. And the perspective is of the lens of a collector: acquisition, production, deconstruction, and genealogy, in the sense that The provenance for the stories of many of the books were the Silk Road, that among the things that traveled up and down the Silk Road, objects for sure, but also religion and stories. So let's begin. And on Thursday, the Oriental Institute is a collaborator of the Nourishment Projects. Tasha Vorderstrasse will be co-presenting with me because there's a whole section on the Shah Abbas Bible. It's one of her passions, so I think she has a wonderful story to tell. So if you do come back on Thursday, there'll be many fun tidbits in there as well. The Nourishment Project pivots on scholarship. So these are some of the references I've used. I'll be happy to share them with if anyone wants them. And the Silk Road, just to start off, were trade networks. They spanned geographies and centuries. And even now, for the last maybe 8-9 years, China has invested heavily, almost $1 trillion in starting what's called the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a modern version of the Silk Road for shipping goods. It has maritime trades, it has land routes and air, and also significantly the digital space. So the digital Silk Route is a very big part of the Belt and Road Initiative that China has. Every time you're doing online shopping, you're part of it. So starting with manuscripts come in many different forms. You have parchment, which is animal skin. It can be vellum, which is cat skin, goat skin. You have paper. You also have palm leaves. You have birch bark. This one is palm leaf, Buddhist treatise from the 10th century. There were 222 of them, and most of you will know they usually have a backing of wooden backings in the front and the back, tied together, corded together. This is in the Cambridge University. And this Legenda Aurea, the Golden Legend, is a book of Christian saints. The reason I chose this one, this is in the library in Florence. One of the stories in there is the story of Barlaam and Josaphat from the 10th century again. It's the Christianized story of the Buddha, where the Buddha is now a Christian saint called Josaphat. It's really interesting how stories travel. That's one of the reasons I included this book. And this is in the Edinburgh University Library, the Jami al-Tawarik. It's the book that was commissioned by Ghazan, which is the Mongol Ilkhanid ruler who, around the time he converted to Islam, because prior to this, Mongols were animistic. And though Islam normally does not allow for figurative drawings, they do exist. As you can see, the birth of Muhammad in this book. And you can see the Christian symbolism is quite apparent. Here you see the angels with the wings one would see in a Christian illustration. And the 3 wise men have been replaced with women. Wise decision, I think. Then we have the Nal Saga, which is a Icelandic literature treasure. And there are many other Norse saga that has been very influential. The Norse poetic and prose Edda influenced Wagner for his Ring Cycle and Tolkien with Lord of the Rings. What else do the Icelandics do except drink, read, and play chess? Quite a good life. This one is in the Morgan Library. This is called The Black Hours. It's one of the 15th century Flemish masterpieces. Only 7 exist in the world. This is again in the Morgan Library. And usually Book of Hours, devotional books are white on vellum. Vellum is parchment, cat skin. They had to go through a process where you dip this in an iron copper solution. This process is extremely corrosive and exorbitantly expensive. It gives the background. And so the gold and the silver letterings pop up on the book. Only 7 exist in the world. And then we have, that one's in the Morgan as well. And this is a Morgan Library masterpiece, the Lindau Gospel. It's called Lindau because it was housed once in the German town of Lindau. The St. Gall Library that I had shown earlier in Switzerland, this book, the illustrations were done in St. Gall. And the reason I'm including this in the Silk Road presentation, because inside the manuscript, you have silk aligning the backing. And this book is actually, most of these books, they're designed to impress. It is Jerusalem, a city of jewels, where gold is the mortar that paves the city. So imagine in context, here's the priest in a Sunday service holding the book aloft, where the sun is streaming in through the stained glass window. And the book becomes as radiant as the Lord himself. And so the book dazzles and illumines the devotees. That is the singular purpose of books. They're designed to impress. And so we now start with how do you go about acquiring books this magical? So in the 19th century, many countries were interested in finding land routes to India. Napoleon had actually started it, but they wanted influence in Central Asia and the Middle East. This humorous picture, he's showing the Afghan ambassador saying, "Save me for my friends." It's with friends like these, who needs enemies? So we have the Russian bear salivating as the British lion growls on. So the routes that we call the Silk Road were of deep interest geopolitically during the 19th and the 20th century. Almost every country that eventually shows up in the World War II had an interest there. So you have Russia, Finland also, which was connected with Russia then, England, France, Germany, even Japan. So imagine that it is 1889 and the British East India Company is firmly rooted in India. And a Scottish explorer, Andrew Dalglish, has been murdered by an Afghan, Dad Mohammed. And so the British captain, Hamilton Bower, is trying to catch the murderer. It's almost like a movie. He ends up in the Taklamakan desert area. And there he's approached by an antiquity seller who sells him a manuscript. Captain Bower brings the manuscript back to Calcutta, which was then the capital of the British East India, and the Royal Asiatic Society. He gives it to a scholar named A.F. Rudolph Hornley, who deciphers this manuscript. It was made of birch bark. There were about 55 or 56 leaves, and he determines it's Sanskrit, which is very interesting because he finds Sanskrit manuscripts in the middle of the desert. And that discovery sets off, in lack of a better term, a plundering that's been financed by European monarchs and institutions. And here is a picture of what is now known as the Bower manuscripts. It's at the Bodleian Library in Oxford University. This then allows lots and lots of treasure hunters, book hunters to come into this area of Afghanistan, Karakoram range, which is the extreme edges. In the northwest edge would be Afghanistan, Tajikistan, go across the Himalayas all the way into China. They come to hunt for books, but under that rubric, they also get to map out geopolitically the lands in there because the deserts are always changing. So from Sweden, you have Sven Hedin, you have Count Otani from Japan on the left, and we have Paul Pelliot from France. Pelliot was a great sinologist, so he knew how to read Chinese, and he was a scholar. And then we also have, during this time, remember, the tea trades are going on, everything about the Orient, and the Orient includes China, the Far East, India, is exotic to all of Europe. So we have a Baron Gustav Mannerheim, who's also there trying to find these books and treasures. He eventually becomes the president of Finland. He was a great friend of Winston Churchill. But the focus for today is going to be, as far as acquisition is concerned, is Mark Aurel Stein. He's a wonder. He was a Hungarian born. He became a British national, I think, in around 1904. He was a scholar, a consummate scholar through and through. Unlike the other book hunters, as if you may call them that, his interest was absolutely academic. He had a military background. He was very disciplined. He was also a good photographer, all of which bode very well for his travels. And he has volumes that are published. Serindia is one of them. And this is documents that are very used by researchers now. Tasha, who will be coming on Thursday, she uses this for references. What alerted Mark Aurel Stein is, once the Bower manuscript was found and Hornley, the scholar, started receiving lots of manuscripts from India, specifically ones from a consul general of Britain, who's George Macartney. If you ever have the time, look up George Macartney. These are people who are utterly humane. Their life stories are very pertinent in this day and age now. So George Macartney sent him lots of documents. They come from this area of Khotan and the Xinjiang province areas, and that alerted Dr. Stein because he had been there and he had never seen documents like this. So he thought perhaps they were fake, that they were a forger. And so in 1900s, Mark Aurel Stein, who had a very good Sanskrit background, he was a Sanskrit scholar. At that time, there was a Sanskrit college in London, no longer exists. He decides to take a trip in this area of Taklamakan Desert. And he eventually tracks down the forger, because there was one, Islam Akhund. And so the picture here you see is an example of forgery, opened up. This is what it was. He was a clever man. He had a partner, Ibrahim Mullah, and they had actually discovered 2 or 3 genuine manuscripts. And with when all these foreigners came in to hunt for old manuscripts, they got clever. They decided to forge documents. They couldn't read these, so they just copied a whole bunch of scripts down and started sending them. Then what happens? Greed takes over. That copying them down by hand got tiresome, so he made wood block prints and started printing them out. And he didn't know what he was building together because he couldn't read them much. But then he also didn't know that others could read them, so he started printing them and selling them in large amounts, which is what gave him away to someone like R.L. Stein. But look at his partner, Ibrahim Mullah, even more clever. That man privately started forging documents, selling to the Russians, and he got really imaginative. In between his Brahmi and Kharosthi script, he put in Cyrillic script, which is a hodgepodge of Turkic, Slavic, Mongolic script. Can you imagine the poor Russian translator? They come across this thing and go, oh my God, they knew Slavic 1500 years ago. Let's write a new paper. You have to laugh about this stuff. The great thing about R.L. Stein that I find, he then discreetly wrote a letter to Hornley because he was a colleague. He wasn't there to for any one-upmanship. He wrote a discreet letter saying perhaps that this was deception. So he wanted to give Hornley a very dignified way of getting out of this, which is what I love about R.L. Stein. He was not one to look for attention. And then, but he said something, this is not verbatim, something to the effect that he admires brains even if found in a scoundrel like Islam Akun, because Islam Akun had found real documents. So he suspected there might be a lot more. So Mark R.L. Stein puts a trip together, which is going to take him across the Karakoram range, over the Himalayas, into the desert area. This is a time when there is no GPS. He pretty effectively, he had a glorified version of Marco Polo's map, I suspect. And so he puts a trip together, and his military background comes to play because unlike the other scholars, like a Sven Hedin, they pretty much flung themselves into the desert. Sven Hedin is known to have killed tons of his team members. He was an indiscriminate, he was ill-planned. He almost died himself many times because of lack of water. R.L. Stein was the exact opposite. You will find in the archives details of things that he bought to plan for his trip. He even ordered coats for his dog. This is dog number 1. He had lots of dogs. They were all named Dash. And look at Dash.
This is a dog.
Sorry?
Not a dog.
In the back, he's a dog.
Sure. Where's the dog? Oh, there's the dog.
Yeah. The first Dash had 2 black ears. The second one had 1 black ear. I looked. And so you see his team crossing the ice-cold fjords of the Himalayas because in the springtime, the glaciers melted down. Imagine the challenge of doing all this. And I love these details. So in the Tajikistan, in the springtime, when the floods come unexpected, because you don't know where the water is coming from, here's his team. I'm assuming they ate these goats. Nothing is wasted. Then they blew them up because goat skin is waterproof, filled them up like a balloon and created rafts so they could get over the flooding. The ingenuity of doing this is just amazing to me. They went over treacherous precipices. And the dog was in there too. And last month, when we talked about the luxury textiles, we realized there were yurts, the circular tents that the Mongols had used. Here is him and his team crossing the Himalayas, all going east using the yurts. He eventually ends up at the Lop Desert. So the discipline of a military background comes in very handy because he had to make sure he packed enough blocks of ice, was sent up ahead with the camels, so they could find water when they went ahead. There was a reason. It wasn't an accident that nobody in his team died. Only one creature died, an old horse. So he didn't kill anybody. So there are the camels, and there's Dash number 2. And Dash number 2 was called Sir Traveler by his team. He was a great traveler as well. He used to learn to jump on the back of the camel.
Wasn't Dash the name of
Queen Victoria's dog as well? Yes. Well, yeah. Isn't it fun, these odd details? So he gets all the way through. And this is Mark Stein at his quintessential, an academic. He's jotting down his travels. He documents everything, volumes of work that are still used by researchers today. I admire him deeply. The reason I include this picture is not that camels drink water, but they can withstand temperature fluctuations across the board, which is very handy. They were essential to the Silk Road. The reason I'm showing this is we wouldn't have a Silk Road were it not the Himalayan glaciers that melted and provided water. The oasis towns would not exist had not there been water. And so when towns got deserted, it's figurative and literal. When you run out of water, the towns are gone, the desert takes over. Glacier melt is crucial to the Silk Road, and it's also critical now, especially what's going on in the Himalayan glacier regions and water rights in India, China, and Pakistan is frightening. So he eventually gets to, in this corner, you see Dunhuang. So he had gone from Kashmir all the way further west, all the way to Dunhuang, about a little bit more than 1,000 miles. It's almost going from New York to Minneapolis. So the Dunhuang caves, there were 492 caves. And they're a little, maybe 16 miles away from the town of Dunhuang. This is Mark Arlstein's picture, and this is what you see now when you go in there. And these caves are an homage to the Buddhist caves in India, the Ajanta-Ellora caves. So Buddhism had radiated out of India. They went east and west. So you see the Buddhist caves in China. You also see Buddhist statues and everything in the west, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, Uzbekistan. Interestingly enough, I thought you might like this, Barbara, and whoever else has been to Uzbekistan, Bukhara, the term is the, I guess, Eastern pronunciation of the Sanskrit term vihara, which means monastery. So the Bukhara term itself is a original, etymologically, it's a Sanskrit term vihara, which means learning center. So this is the, I think Joseph and most of you will know who this man is. I have trouble pronouncing these things. Wang Wanlu. He was the abbot who had discovered these caves in 1900. And while he was renovating some of the temple caves, he found on the side a small chamber that held thousands of manuscripts from the floor to the ceiling. And again, it attests to Mark Stein that he earned the trust of this abbot. And when Mark Stein made a donation for temple restoration, the priest allowed him to take thousands of objects from here. Very soon came the French, Paul Pelliot, and then Russian, and Germans came and took a lot. Ironically, objects that survived for thousands of years in these caves, when they ended up in the Berlin Museum during World War II, they were destroyed in the Allied bombing of a German museum. History is ironic. But anyway, these caves were commissioned by the wealthy Buddhists during the Silk Road. And after a time, the Silk Road, these caves were no longer in use for no other reason except that the maritime sea routes were found, so they stopped using land routes. So they were a great preservation point, and then the climate itself preserved a lot of the manuscripts. So this is some of the pictures inside the caves. I believe, Joseph, you've been there, and probably many of you have also. They're rather beautiful. I will bring this point up. If you look up in this ceiling here, I will focus on that in a little bit. And I tried to pull out objects that would specifically interest this group. So you see on the left, the votive panel, which is when you have a vow fulfillment, you give a votive. Very recognizable, a Ganesh. One of you, I think Barbara was having a Ganesh statue today. Interestingly enough, here is the effect of the Silk Road on the Ganesh. If you look at his top right arm, Ganesh here, such a recognizable Indian deity, he is holding a rhomboid blade. The Indian ones don't hold that one. It is a blade used for sericulture, for silk farming. So I like how they adapt and change it to fit the needs. I always feel reinterpretation is a form of preservation. So you see that right here for the Ganesh. And among the objects found, this is just for a bit of humor. This is a letter written by a Sogdian woman. Sogdians were great traders of the Silk Road. They said they had tongues of honey and could make you buy anything. Brilliant salespeople. This is a letter written by a Sogdian wife to a husband, the traveler. In short, she says, I would rather be a dog's or a pig's wife than yours. She was kind of angry. But if you read the letter later, it's a bit sad because she was left for a long time. And she was once well-to-do. She fell on hard times and her life was really bad. She was supremely angry. I want to show this picture. This is in the National Museum of New Delhi, because even in the Art Institute, you will see often Gandhara statues of Buddha with a mustache. It's not that common to find pictures of the Buddha, a painting that has him with a mustache, which I saw here. I thought that was interesting, surrounded by his 6 disciples. And here again is the ceiling I wanted to bring to your attention. In relationship to the Silk Road, here are motifs that traveled. It didn't probably originate in China. I suspect it originated in the Mesopotamia region. The 3 hairs motif, it shows up in many places, China, Mesopotamia, in England. The one on the top you see is from the Sprayton Church in England from 15th century. And the symbolism of that is diverse. This symbolism of the rabbit in Easter with fertility is obvious. When does a mammal not lay eggs? But in China, you have white hairs. They say there's a white hair in the moon. And you see the 3-hair motif in the center of the Dunhuang caves. You find the 3-hair motifs in 18 caves of the 400, almost 500 statues, 482 or 92 statues, surrounded by the Buddha. I thought that was interesting. And though childish looking, it is not. I love this one because it's probably drawn by a novice monk. I love the spindly arms of the Buddha, something that my child would draw. And perhaps the monk drew himself in or his little brother in. I found it was wonderful. But the reason we know of Mark Aurel Stein, before that, I love this one. This is one of my favorite things. It's the 2 monkeys in an embrace. It was a terracotta statue found by Aurel Stein, made in the 9th century. When I saw this in the International Dunhuang Project website, I immediately thought of Brancusi's statue. Look at the two, the similarities. I'm not implying that Brancusi copied this. Oddly enough, when Mark Aurel Stein discovered it in 1907, it was around the same time that Brancusi made that statue. The reason for the inclusion is, this is called modern. This looks very modern to me. I don't know why one calls art primitive. Beauty is beauty. I just love this one. So Mark Aurel Stein is famous for having discovered the world's earliest dated, complete woodblock printed manuscript, the Diamond Sutra, Vajracharika Sutra. The Diamond Sutra and the Heart Sutra are part of the great sutras of the Buddha, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, which is called Prana Praramita Sutra. That's not the important part. It's called the Diamond Sutra, Vajracharika. Vajra means thunderbolt. It's the thunderbolt that cuts through the illusion, Maya. So it gets to the heart of the essence of Buddhism, Shunyata, or which you called Nibbana, Nirvana. Originally, there were 7 panels that comprised this 16-foot-long scroll. And the fact that there were many other scrolls that were found, this is of particular interest because it's a complete scroll. It precedes the Gutenberg Bible by 600 years, although that's not a fair comparison, because one, the Gutenberg is movable type, it's movable metal type. This is woodblock. But it wouldn't make sense for the Chinese to have movable type back then. The Chinese has 10,000 characters. It's not really practical to have 10,000 movable types. Woodblocks work. And so these 7 panels were put together in a scroll. And when it's in the British Library now, and just for context, I'm showing you, I think coincidentally, Joseph mentioned the Book of the Dead. Well, voila, here it is. This is the Book of the Dead in Turin. It's 28 feet long. To be displayed, it has to be put in a tunnel. That's how long this is. So in context, that's how long the Diamond Sutra is. The Diamond Sutra are the Chinese translations of the Sanskrit sutras of the Buddha. And the colophon itself helped determine that it's a complete manuscript. The colophon at the end always tells when it was made. It's almost like a made-in label. Effectively, it is saying it's reverentially made for the universal free distribution by Wang She, made in the year May 11th, 868. So the parts to note that was important to me to point out is that the universal free distribution, because it's being done to accrue merit. Buddhism has very little to do with God. It's almost like your own behavior patterns. So someone commissioned to make this so he could accrue merit. Same reason why those caves had been carved out in Dunhuang. And here's a close-up of the wood block print. It's really sweet. You see the Buddha, how do you say it, Buddha, sitting in a grove of trees, surrounded by his disciples. And here is his elderly disciple asking for wisdom, which he then gives the treatise, Shubhuti. And there he's sitting on his mat with his sandals off. And it's kind of cute and sweet, isn't it? There are the lions sitting there with their tongues coming out, almost like pussycats. I loved it. But the other small fun facts about the Diamond Sutra, if you can call it the fun facts, when it was discovered, Aurel Stein didn't know what it was. He just brought it back. It was his colleague, the French book hunter, Paul Pelliot, who when later saw it in the British Library, realized what he had found. So when it was found, it was covered yellow. And the conservators of that time, this is not a complaint, you do the best you can. They didn't know what that meant. scrolls had been dipped in this dye called berberine, which is made out of cork tree dye, because it's an insecticide. It gives the scroll a yellow color. Considering yellow is the imperial color of China, Buddhism in China had co-opted the color yellow and made it for the Buddha. So because they were yellow to sign that it signals that it signifies the Buddha, the conservators didn't know that. So when they received it, they had washed it in water. Luckily, it was plain water, not chlorinated water, or would have ruined these manuscripts. And you can, there it is, these little torn marks. They have since been very carefully conserved and restored to great conditions. The Diamond Sutra is no longer on display. It used to be displayed in the 40s and the 50s. It took a 10-year conservation. It's been packed away in the panel format, so it's been removed because they had put it up in a scroll. They had put a lot of backing on the side and hung it up on the wall. And over the years, the glue that they had used had constricted. And so the scroll started to tear apart. So they very carefully over 10 years removed the backing. It has now been put back in panels in a box. I don't know when they'll display it again. But this is the form of the scrolls that Mark Stein would have found. These are actually his pictures. So he found scrolls like this. Imagine the trouble of having to go back all the way from the deserts across these rivers with thousands of manuscripts and sculptures. That journey would have been, I can't even imagine what it was. So he brings them all back to India and then he ships them to England. I read somewhere, they said that the Dunhuang caves are the Louvre of the East. I don't like that. I think in context, if anything, first of all, don't compare. Louvre would be the Dunhuang of the West. This supersedes by age a lot. So the more we look, antiquities acquisition has remarkable stories. So the next part of our story goes into, okay, how do you produce books that are so worthy of collection that captures our humanity? So this section is going to be the production of manuscripts. This is the same book that I had first shown that had the picture of the birth of Muhammad. It's in the Edinburgh University Library, Jami al-Tawarik. This had been commissioned by Ghazan, who had converted to Islam. So I want to call to your attention, this is in the Chester Beatty Library, the Ruzbihan Quran. Just a question, has anyone else heard of this document? Okay, because I hope I'm able to share with you something you don't know. I would hate to waste your time. So the Ruzbihan Quran is called so because it was created by the illustrator and calligrapher, Ruzbihan Muhammad al-Tabi al-Shiraz, because it says al-Shiraz. He is from the area of Shiraz in Iran, which was a centerpiece and a focal point of manuscript making. This was commissioned by Shah Tahmasp. And remember his name, he's going to come up again later. Commissioned books are a sign of wealth across all cultures. If you commission a book, you have money even today. When you see books that has this amount of ultramarine and gold lavished across the pages, it alerts us that it is exorbitantly wealthy because ultramarine is made of lapis lazuli, one of the most costliest paints in the world. And I'm going to swoon for the next half an hour myself. So real gold leaf and gold paint. So gold paint is made when you take gold, the mineral, crush it, mix it with Arabica gum, and you store it in mollusk shells. And so that's why it's called shell gold. And then you can have thin layers of gold, which is used as gold leaf. So throughout the document, and remember, this has 445 folios. I'm going to show you the amount of effort that goes into creating these. Throughout the manuscript, you can see these, I'll try to point out indentations that are made on the paper so that it gives it an uneven surface. So when the Quran is read, and the Imams probably have the Quran, well, definitely have the Qurans memorized, but when others are reading this Quran in the evening by candlelight, the uneven surface picks up the flickering of the candlelight. So it gives you the effect that the calligraphy, the word of the Allah, is shimmering, moving across the pages. It's utterly magical. The amount of ingenuity, time, and resource one puts into creating this just makes me gasp. So you see the amount of ultramarine and gold that is lavished on the pages. And the ultramarine is coming from Afghanistan. This is the same time, this book was made in 1550, around the same time, the 16th century is when you also have the other great artist, one of the many other great artists, Michelangelo. And the entombment was, Michelangelo was not finished. This is an unfinished painting of his in the National Gallery in London. It was not finished because his lapis lazuli hadn't arrived on time. His apprentices couldn't convert it to paint. And I'm pointing this out simply that these are the same time frames that you have a Rusbian and a Michelangelo. And I chose this manuscript so that I can bring to attention artists who are remarkable, who may not belong in the Renaissance, I don't know, cadre. So the process of creating these documents matter very much. There's a strict guideline. It's, you have, just like Renaissance artists had a whole atelier, so did these manuscript makers. There was a calligrapher, there was a framer, there were illustrators, all of them worked together in a sequence. Because when you're working with paints as expensive as ultramarine and gold, you certainly don't want them to dry up on your pen. And the pen again comes from the name, from the Latin word penna, which is the Latin word for feather, because you then cut the quill and made a pen out of it. So first and foremost, because ultramarine absorbs color, the sequence of the paints matter. Someone, and I'm going to show this in a second. This is the work that I'm actually focusing on. All these tiny works with thin gold work. Keep that in mind. That's what my focus is now. So we go down here. Someone first goes and takes a fine pen and draws these extremely fine gold lines, does all the paintings. Then someone comes after him, an illustrator, fills up all the blue of the ultramarine. That is why if you look, I'm going to zoom in, you can sense the delicacy of using ultramarine near the gold borders because they don't want to get the blue on top of the gold. You have to be very careful, extremely skilled, and have like brilliant eyes. I don't even know how to do this because ultramarine would just absorb the apricots, the oranges, the blues. They would not show up. So sequence again, I'm showing this to determine the sequence of painting. The flaked blue reveals the gold leaf underneath it. And here are again the indentation so it can pick up the shimmering of the light. And the calligraphy goes on top of it. So someone did, some illustrations did the back, then the calligrapher comes in. And these ornamentation here is very cunning. It's more than just ornamentation. It's telling the reader where to take a pause when you're reading the Quran. To the Imam, he'll know exactly where to pause. To the novice reader of the Quran, these and later these, I'll come back to it. You see all these blue marks on the top. These finials are actually pronouncing, they're cheat sheets. Their finials are telling you where to put an accent while you're reading the Arabic script. When you look here, look at the, this is just one page of 445. Somebody comes in, does the background, and then comes the calligrapher. He comes in. Suppose there's not enough space. What does he do? He sometimes goes out of the margins. Islamic manuscripts are very, very structured, very ornamented, very geometric, just like their textiles, just like their architecture. They usually have frames, and there's usually not much work done in the margins. This is an exception, or this is not very common, but sometimes they go outside the margins. Other times, when he has space left, the illustrator will come back and fill it up. And just as a side note, I get lost in the weeds with these things. The material matters. When you use parchment to create these documents, they're not as smooth as paper. So when it's smooth, the nib moves more smoothly. And so you will see over time the floweriness of the script across all cultures, all writing, because the original Islamic Kufic writing is much more blocky. It's still beautiful. But then when you go down to the Nastaliq scripts, which you see some in these smaller writings, they're absolutely gorgeous to look at. And I took a zoom in of the frame because all these paints had to be created. They didn't go to Hobby Lobby and buy paints, obviously. So the green in here is mixed with copper, just as the Black Hours, the Flemish book, had dipped it in a copper iron sulfate. Copper is corrosive. And that's why the conservation matters. The copper green is eating through the papers. So the Chester Beatty Library spent a lot of time making sure they were careful in conserving these documents. The spectrum of colors that are created is wonderful. The pink would have been created with the yellow flower, the safflower. That's the safflower they used to create the pink color dye. And here it's more obvious, the finials and the blue and the ornamentation here, helping the person pronounce the words of the Quran. And it's not just a bland pink. One thing to notice during this time, remember this, the Safavid period, this is 1550, this is after the Ilkhanids, after the Mongols. And here's the beauty of the Mongol disruption. They had routinely resettled Chinese from China, the artisans into Iran, and resettled them back. And so Iran had learned of burnished gold paper. They used to come as diplomatic gifts from China. They paid quite a lot. There's a lot of archive documentation, how much they paid to the illustrators, to the calligraphers, and the amount they paid for paper. So most of this paper came from China. And so if you look up, so they had this gold burnished paper, and then you see the pink that someone carefully went, you have speckled pink, you have sponge pink, you have paper that's awash in pink. On top, you have the calligraphy writing. And then just stop me, because I can go on forever. You see these panels here? These rinsaus, which is like a fancy art term of saying vines with decorations. Different levels of skill sets of the illustrators. This rinsau is less ornamented than the ones here. Talks to the skill set, not the skill set, sorry, the skill of the artisan that did this section. Each flower is different. They are all individually done. Keep in mind, 449 pages of this. And we come back to the Shamsa, which is the sun. The illumination that comes through gives the Sultan the divine light. This is a motif that travels throughout the Islamic culture. It is the Samsha that illumines both the book and the reader. Shows up again in the Shamsa of the Badshanama. This is the Chronicles of Shah Jahan, he of the Taj Mahal fame. And his grandfather Akbar is shown here. This picture is obviously propaganda. So remember, the Gutenberg Bible was created in 1455, I think. So in the 15th century, movable type existed. And so books that were printed traveled. I point that out. You can see the winged cherubs, I think it's called cherubims, I don't know, holding up the Samsha and the sun. So the motifs have mixed Christian iconography in the Islamic paintings. And I laugh at this because the Safavids and the Mughals weren't best of friends, even though Shah Abbas from the Safavid used to provide lots of luxury textiles to Akbar's Mughal court. One wonders, is Akbar really embracing him or dominating him? Because they fought quite often. And so you see Shah Abbas here standing on the sheep, the piece. And here, look, you have the Red Sea and the map, and there's India. It's really sweet. And the lion of the Akbar. And Shah Abbas here. I love the color combination. I wish men wore pink with this teal, greenish, blue, and yellow. Spectacular. He is a great point to move on to the next part of our story, which is the story of deconstruction. Because the name itself, Shah Abbas Bible, should alert us. Islamic ruler Shah Abbas and his Christian Bible is a very interesting story. It is found in the Morgan Library. It has many names. It is the Crusader Bible, the Massey-Joski Bible, which is named after the Cardinal Bernard Massey-Joski, and the Morgan Picture Bible. Little backstory about the Bible. It was created in the 13th century in Paris. From there, it was shipped over to Naples to add the Latin captions. Then it went to Rome, which was then how it ended up in the hands of Cardinal Massey-Joski. From there, he gifted it to Shah Abbas as a diplomatic gift, gets to Shah Abbas in 1607. At that point, it only had Latin captions. Shah Abbas couldn't read it, so he had the pictures, and this folio had only 48 or 49, this book had 48 or 49 folios. I say only compared to the 800 or 400 plus pages in the Islamic ones, but these are also very beautiful. He has Persian explanations written on the margins. Lots of fun things go on in the margins of these Bibles. In 1722, the Library of Isfahan has been raided. And then all of a sudden it's gone for a while, shows up again in Cairo. At that point, at some years after that, Sotheby's conducts the sale, and the book is bought by Sir Thomas Philip. He's a renowned bibliophile. It's in his collection, and when he dies, his daughter sells the book, and then in 1916, it is bought by the Pierpont Morgan Library, and that's where it resides. I'm going to skip this section because I know the story of it, but I figured if any of you come back in Thursday, you can hear Tasha tell the story because this is her passion project. But quickly enough, you will see initially this had no captions. It was simply drawn. It would make sense. Not all the kings were literate. Just like now, just because you have money doesn't mean you're very educated. Back then it was true as well, even more so true. So they were just pretty cartoony cartoons, picture books. Then Latin descriptions were added. But the interesting part is over the years when captions were added on, at the end, it's the Judeo-Persian captions that were most true to the story of the Bible than these original ones. And Tasha will explain. Parts that you will also like is this section, that a lot of the Persian script. So for example, look at this, the two Qurans that you find in the Cambridge University. This is High German written in Yiddish script. So you have Judeo-Persian writing throughout this book. So it's Arabic, Persian writing in Yiddish script. It's a fascinating story. And the pictures are fun. Here's somebody holding on to the sage. It's meant to be a catapult. There's a man hanging on the side. It's really, they're not so somber and serious. They had a great sense of humor when they created these documents. So when Shah Abbas got it, he had received the book intact. By the time it moved on from his hand, some pages had been removed, specifically this one, because the Morgan Library has about 43 of the folios. There's one folio, this one, it's in the Getty Museum in LA, and there's 2 folios in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and there's 1 folio or 2 missing. I'm sure it'll show up sometime. He had removed this page. It would make sense because this is the page that gave the story of Absalom, which is the 3rd son of King David, who had rebelled against King David and subsequently was killed. I can assume why Shah Abbas wouldn't like that story, because he had killed his own son. So this page had been removed, which brings me to the point of this section, which is deconstruction. Here is a folio, 1 folio from a book of the Shahnameh. There are many illustrated versions of the Shahnameh. This is the Houghton Shahnameh. This had been commissioned in the 15th, 16th century by Shah Tahmasp, the same guy who commissioned Ruzbihan Quran. Actually, technically speaking, it was his father, Ismail, Shah Ismail, who had commissioned the book. He died, his son kept it going. It took 20 years to make. So almost 760 folios. Each detail of the Ruzbihan Quran is applied in magnitude in this one. From the burnished gold pages. And I thought of you, Diane, when I saw this page. Look, it's drawn as if the book itself is opening like a pop-up book. The story is just spilling out of the book. I coo over this. It's right now at the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto. Okay, so one of the people who owned the book, so it was created in the 1550. It survived intact for 400 years, ends up in the Rothschild collection. From there, it comes into the ownership of Arthur Houghton, he of the Houghton Library in Harvard. And at some point, I don't know why, a page comes out. First, I thought, why would you do that? Because Houghton was a book fanatic. He worked for the Library of Congress. He was extremely wealthy. He would have to be to own this book. This page comes out in 2011. It went on sale at Sotheby's. 1 page, $12.15 million. And the details of the painting, and this is just 1 page. God knows what the rest of it looks like. Look at the ibex, looking back, and almost the siren-like pictures of the rocks in here. The beauty of this horse, this pale blue horse, the details of the Mongol features. And if you look on, once again, the Mongols had resettled Chinese, so the Chinese good luck dragon motif comes through. The snow leopard, I thought of you, Barbara, when I saw this. It's stunning. And I brought this up because I thought it was so topical with the discussion we were having with Shaurya Kumar. We speak about, idols being removed out of context from temple. Whenever you see single folios being sold at a Sotheby's or a Christie's or anywhere, they belong in a book. Every time there's a folio being hung up somewhere, it should alert us just as much as if you have a problem with seeing idols out of context. These are all out of context if you sell them. I can at least forgive. I can tolerate Houghton. This man, to me, downright, I know I'm being taped, he's vile. He was an art dealer called Demott. They call it the Demott Shahnameh. Over the years, people have stopped calling it that because they don't want to give him any more credit. This is the Mongol Shahnameh, commissioned during the Ilkhanate period. by Ghazan. So look, this story is Iskandar's visit to the Brahmins, which is the story of Alexander visiting India. Dumont bought this book, and then to recoup money, he pulled apart the books and sold the folios individually to get his money back. I can understand that financial aspect. I don't agree with it, but I can understand it. What I have huge problems with is he hired on purpose calligraphers to sit there and fill in stories from other ends. So he tampered the book on purpose, and he sold forged documents. There's no justification for what he did. So his folios appear everywhere. This is in the Smithsonian Fair Art Gallery. This is in the Fogg Art Museum in Harvard. So when all these places talk about provenance, they should be a bit careful. But I do forgive them because, well, not forgive, who am I to forgive? You never know where you get these collections from. If someone gifts you a collection, it's really hard to justify where did these come from. But I think they belong together in a book. And because they are beautiful, the amount of hours spent by unknown artists creating each page, I wish they knew. Anyway, this one, so the spectrum of how things are deconstructed is really complex. This book is in the Oriental Institute. Just to give a balance, not everything is bad, not everything is for financial reason. Whoever made this book is a labor of love because they took cutouts of their favorite calligraphy, made an accordion book, designed a rather beautiful collection, a book cover, because he loved the calligraphy. This is still a deconstructed manuscript, but it's an absolute labor of love. So one really cannot judge, except if you're Demott. I can't stand that man. Anyway, so we move on to the next part of our story, which is the heart of the matter, genealogy. Where do stories come from? And it fits into the narration of the Silk Road because the provenance is the Silk Road. Stories travel throughout. So an example of which is the Panchatantra, which is animal fables from India, 300 BC. It's effectively translates into, in Sanskrit, 5 treaties. It was translated by the Persian physician Burzua in Pallav, which is old Persian script, around 6th century. That story was then translated into Arabic. It's called Kalila wa Dimna. If you Google this book, magnificent illustrations. It's eye-wateringly beautiful. It's the Arabic Aesop's Fables. It's very famous. Almost all children know of these stories. It showed up in Europe in the 16th century moral philosophies of Dhoni, and as the Fables of Bidpai, which is the fun pronunciation of the Indian scholar Vidyapati. They couldn't say that, so they call him Bidpai. The French call him Pilpai, and La Fontaine, Jean de La Fontaine, who's known to be the great French storyteller, he credits it. He acknowledges his indebtedness to the Indian sage. He calls Bidpai Pilpai. Doesn't matter, stories travel. So the one I want to bring to your attention is the Arabian Nights. In Arabic, it's called Hazaru Afsan. Hazar means 1,000. This, I will once again, Tasha will be able to share details about this page. It's one of the oldest documents in the world. They have a copy. It is called the 1,000 Nights because effectively 1,001 is just like saying a gazillion. It doesn't really mean there was 1,001. So I want to give the backstory of the Arabian Nights because it's an entirely European concoction. So we have this Frenchman, Anton Golland. He was a secretary to the French ambassador to the Ottoman Empire during the time of Louis XIV, the Sun King. Thank you, Merle. I remembered now. So he was I like it when people catch my mistakes. It's the only way I get better. And I do make mistakes. Here you see that he was a great scholar. He spoke Turkish, Arabic, Persian. And around the time when he was in his 60s, so when he was out of the diplomatic corps, he was translating a book, which is now called the Galan manuscript, which had, from the 15th century Syria, stories. They had about 282 stories, which he translated into French. You can see his French notations. And this is the genesis of what we call the Arabian Nights. So he translated the stories and they were published in monthly serialized form. So they didn't come with any sort of, I want to make sure I have the right time in here. They didn't come in any sort of illustrations. There were none in there. So this is in 1706, the frontispiece. It's so sweet. The story of Scheherazade shown here, sitting on a bed, in a 4-poster bed with Shahryar, the king. And there's a sister, Danayazad. They call her Dinarzad. but this would never happen, right? This is a European version of how the Eastern stories would be. You would not have Shahryar sitting on a bed with Shahrazadi when he's about to kill her the next night. But this is a very rare copy. It was a huge success. And so from 1704-6, around that time, it had 12 volumes, finished around 1717. And when it became, I mean, Galland's bijou stories just made all of Europe fall in love, because in context around this time, they are loving tea, they like everything Oriental. And because he was part of Louis XIV's area, you know, the same time from the story of tea, we know that Madame Pompadour, Louis XIV's official mistress, was investing in Sèvres, and all the Oriental patterns were all the craze. So the stories helped. It became popular in France and Europe. Britain followed suit. They copied the stories in form, they call it Arabian Nights, which I privately laugh at. Persia isn't Arabia. So I don't know why you would call this Arabian Nights. Most of the story is Persian, besides the point. But look how they described it. The sultans of Indies, to divert the sultan from executing of a bloody vow he had made to marry a lady every day. Well, if I'm from England, I will say, oh, he puts Henry VIII to shame, a new wife every night. How sweet. So the backstory of how did Galland go about coming up with 1,000 stories or 1,001? Because he only had 282. Well, Galland, when he had these stories, he didn't know it was going to get this popular. When they got this popular, and after the third or the fourth series, his publisher stuck in some Turkish stories under his name. That made Galland very angry. And so I think in 1700, let me check the correct date for, I had a date written because I want to get the wrong date for you. I think in 1709, yeah, in 1709, he went to visit a friend, a real tomb raider, a Paul Lucas. He used to work for Louis XIV because Louis XIV liked baubles, wonderful objects from the East. He used to go raid tombs. And one person who worked for Paul Lucas was this man called Hana Diab. By this time, Galland is in his 60s, I think 62 or 63. He meets this 20-year-old interpreter because in Paris during that time, there were many Syrian Christians who lived there. So this one boy in his early 20s, Hana Diab, used to be the interpreter for Paul Lucas, the tomb raider. And this is when Hana Diab becomes old. This is one of his biographies or autobiography that is found in the Vatican archives. Of the things that it says that he had met, Hana Diab is writing, he had met the Sultan of Versailles. That's what he called this Louis XIV, the Sultan of Versailles. Isn't that sweet? He also said that he had translated, he had shared stories with Antoine Galland, because Galland had run out of stories. He needed to have stories. Remember in Syria at this time, coffee houses are very popular. So they were professional storytellers. That's the milieu that Hana Diab grew up in. And so he knew how to make stories. And one truth was that Paul Lucas, the man that Hana Diab initially worked for, he was a tomb raider. And at some point he had gone to this one city of Idlib in Syria, and he had found a vault underneath a rock. He had asked a local shepherd to climb into the vault and find what's in there. The shepherd had come out with a ring and a lamp. And there was the genesis of the story of Aladdin, because that story does not exist in the original stories that was found in these translations. These stories are made up. Who cares how they were made up? They were fun. So when you find these, Diab wanted to get a job in France, didn't happen, so he moved back to Syria and he became a textile merchant. But now you see it starts getting illustrated. So in the Dutch, so it was initially printed in 1709 all the way through 1717. In 1719, the Dutch David Coster starts the illustrations, and you see again the European version of what they think the Oriental looks like. Over the time in Britain, you have an Edward Lane. He was an ethnographer. He had lived in Egypt. He wanted these stories to be an educational and informational. So he gave an illustrator, William Harvey, in 1841, engravings of Egyptian and I think Moorish engravings to give it a sense of authenticity. So you see the change in the illustrations. We move on further. These illustrations are done by Sir John Tenniel. He's the same man who did the illustrations for Alice in Wonderland. Magnificent. There's Barbara nodding her head. This is where I spend all my time. We move on to show the story of Aladdin, because when Hana Diab had told the story to Galland had said the story in China. because in those times, everything exotic was coming from the East. The tea was coming from the East. So he set the story of Aladdin in China. And so when Walter Crane does the illustrations, this is the first colored illustrations that was done, because he did it for children, because all the previous ones were not meant for children. He set it in China, and you can see the two-dimensional drawings, because Walter Crane thought, well, children don't care about 3D, they have enough imagination. So you see the transition of the illustrations going on. And here comes the fun part of book stories. Richard Burton published them under his Lady Burton series. But look at his cunning. He had to find a way to tell the stories over and over again. History repeats itself. He marketed himself. These are original stories. They're from Arabia. What he had done is he had taken Galland's French translations, had them translated back into in Arabic form, and he translated the Arabic form into English, and he called them original. It's like you retranslate them back. However it is, he was clever enough. He put in all the erotic and the sensuality the original stories have, because they're not clean. He put all of it in, the bestiality, the homosexuality, the castration, all of it was sent in. But he was clever. He didn't put any illustrations because he didn't want to be sued and jailed for profanity. He skipped that part. 10 years later, this illustrator, Albert Letchford, very nice, his name starts with a Lech, he drew all of it out. So it became a great hit. And oddly, ironically, he died of sexual disease in Egypt very soon after that. It's just funny. And we come to the brilliant illustrators of England, Arthur Rackham. This is Sinbad the Sailor. And I want to point out Edmond Dulac, the French one, because they start keeping in the Silk Road background comes over and over. He's influenced by the Japanese styles. Here is Hokusai's 36 views of Mount Fuji. The influence of that shows up in his illustrations for Sinbad the Sailor. Isn't that lovely? Thank you, Betty. Yes, it is. And it keeps going. I mean, there's some magnificent, just spectacularly done illustrations. This is, I think she's from Copenhagen, Danish, Kay Nielsen. She incorporates lots of the Buddhist motifs in her illustrations of the Arabian Nights. They're a marvel. I saw a copy of her book by Toshin. I think it's like $1,000 some, but you can get a cheaper copy. It's gorgeous. And I love this one. Look at Aladdin done by Errol LeCain. This is him finding the lamp. There's the genie. God, they're gorgeous. And here is how it comes full circle. Stories that come from the Middle East that was never illustrated because of the craze and the demand for the books. The Middle East started illustrating the Arabian Nights also. And so these are the Qajar illustrations of the Arabian Nights. Which brings me to the fact that this is the story of the Silk Road. It's going to continue again next month, and then it's going to be the focus is the performing arts. And that reinterpretation is a form of preservation. Just like stories were reinterpreted, you have performing arts. You know, the influence of, say, for example, I bought some pictures. La Bayadere, which is a ballet from France. The term is actually Indian. Bayadere is the Indian term for a nautch girl, the dancing girl that used to dance in the Mughal courts. It's an Indian term. It's not French by a long shot. Then you also have Rodin. The reason I include him, this is a torso of a young woman, a bronze sculpture, and it's well documented that he was influenced by the Chola bronzes from India. You have many other examples like this. You have Dalib's Lakme. Anu can probably laugh at this one. Lakme is the French pronunciation of the goddess Lakshmi. Growing up in India, one of the most popular makeup brands was Lakme. I didn't know Lakme went Lakshmi.
I remember you telling me that. Yeah.
Isn't that funny? Did you know it was Lakshmi?
I learned somewhere along the way. Perhaps it was you that told me.
I had no idea. Imagine that. I didn't know my own language. Like, huh? So the story is going to continue on that, and that the influence, you have Verdi's Aida, commissioned by the Cardiff of Egypt. And then you have Sherazade, Diane, your favorite, Rimsky-Korsakov, Sherazade music. It goes all the way across. I hope you consider joining. And then next week, sorry, not next week, July 30th, I'm doing a presentation on the National Project website on clouds. It's one of the prettiest presentations I've ever put together. If any of you are interested, please come as my guest. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the story. I'm going to stop.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you, thank you,
Oh, yeah.
thank you.
Tiny correction.
I wouldn't even say.
Please
Met-
correct me.
Pompadour was Louis XV's mistress, not.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. See, this is what I want.
I have a correction.
Please correct me.
The painting that you said was Akbar with Shah Abbas, it's actually Jahangir with Shah Abbas. And the painting is called Jahangir's Dream. And if I look distracted, I was trying to find out where it is, and I can't do it on my phone fast enough. But it's been
Thank you, Betty.
published. It's been published by Stuart Cary Welsh.
Right.
And I don't know who owns it right now.
I'll
I'm
look
sorry,
it up.
Madhu's not here. I sent a text to a friend who's a scholar, but I haven't heard back yet.
Oh, thank you, Betty.
I'll
Please
let you
correct
know.
me. This
And
is
one other,
the best thing
You
can
know, you look at these things over and over again, you get to know what these guys look like, and that just didn't look like Akbar.
But okay, wonderful then. And then what was the other one? I may have made, yeah, but just tell me when they come across. I want to know these things.
But that's nitpicking, because the rest of your research is so
fabulous.
impeccable and wonderful, and I feel like I can't wait till Thursday to have another layer of it,
Yeah,
because
me too.
there was so much information that I couldn't digest it all fast enough.
You know what? Oh, thank you, Betty. What was really fun, discovering friends in here. I called Joseph up, I think a week ago, while I was preparing for the performing arts. I found out this Bugaku dance, which it is a painting that shows up in the Dunhuang caves. I was looking them up for research, and I come across this document, and it's a fascinating document. I see written by Joseph Hosiel. I'm like, oh my God. So I called him up, and it's going to show up next month on the performing arts. It's the stage that is shown in the Dunhuang caves. It's the exact setup of the setup of the stage that is used for no dancing. So Joseph,
when you show Rodin, Joseph probably knows that, but Rodin did wonderful watercolor drawings of Cambodian dancers who had been dancing in Paris at the time, and he was completely taken with that.
Fabulous.
Your name? Unmute or mute.
So, Betty, Rodin was the entryway for a bunch of wealthy New Yorkers around Ann Bass, who died last year, sadly, to start this Cambodia dance project, which is with the Bhutan project, the Cambodia project, are probably the two largest dance preservation projects associated with the New York Public Library collection. But it was those Rodin drawings that drew them in the very first place to be interested in Cambodia. So it's interesting, these things that caused the little link to happen.
One of the things Rodin did was he was so taken with some of the dance that he sculpted it as well in just little clay maquettes.
I have a comment and a question. The comment is, and perhaps I simply didn't hear it, but you were talking about the origin of Cyrillic, the Cyrillic alphabet, and I didn't hear Greek. Did you say that?
So sorry. Thank you. I was just saying that when one of the forgers, Ibrahimullah, when he put it in, he knew a bit of Cyrillic script, so he just threw it in there. He didn't know.
But when you were talking about the person then finding it and wondering where it how that could happen, and you were talking. I thought maybe I misheard you. I thought you were talking about the origin, and I was waiting for Greek, and I didn't hear it. But the question is, in that, I can't remember what it was called, but that amazing early Quran with lapis lazuli and gold. Yes. What made the orange? There was a striking orange color in all of that, in the flowers and things, and it was always. And I have no idea what made it. It's just a beautiful color.
Talk among yourselves.
I mean, what is that?
Which manuscript was it?
It was the Quran.
The Ruznian Quran. Okay. This is a great book on color theory. It's a fabulous book. I will look up while we speak. Talk among yourselves.
They often use, the orange was often sindur, which is the same orange that's used. Sindur.
So, but that's not orange.
Sinduris, yeah.
Yeah.
S-I-N.
Shoma, I had another note on the Houghton manuscript, which you said had once been owned by the Rothschilds, and then
Arthur Houghton
reached America. I remember Dan Walker talking about this manuscript, and he indeed tried to sell the whole folio. He tried to sell it to the Shah of Iran. And I could not come across a reason that why the Shah would not have bought this. And I think at the time he offered it for 20 million. But Farah Diba and the Shah at that time were more interested in collecting contemporary. So they chose not to buy it. They wanted the de Koonings, they wanted other paintings of that time. And therefore he was forced to split it up and sell it in pages. That manuscript is now across the world. Japan owns quite a lot of pages. The Met has 6, I think. But it's incredible to think that the Shah, who's the most kind of logical owner for that, chose not to buy it.
Yeah, I'm sure. You know, I try to have, I hope it came across that I said I can be a little bit more benign towards Houghton because he was a book lover. But still, you know, people like the Rothschilds and the Houghtons, how much money do you need that you have to split up in a book like this? It's like, But people like Demott, I cannot fathom how you could he deliberately tricked people. And yes, these books are all over the world. One page here, one page here. I mean, I understand when you have a $20 million price tag, but he owned it. It's not like he had to pay for it.
Well, I think he was broke. He really needed the money. Yes, okay. That's why he needed to sell it. Yeah.
He should have given it to his own library, Houghton Library. He would have been put in place in Harvard, carefully kept for the rest of his life. But what do I know? I can't even afford $20,000 book.
Not yet, but soon.
Oh yes, not a priority.
I'd like to just make a little comment. I really with Betty on this. Your research is fantastic, but
thank you.
More than that, you create visuals that make it easy to follow when you're just blasting out a lot of info. And it's remarkable how you found this balance to keep the attention going along with the story, because it's a lot of information. I think that's a very skillful balance you've struck. As Barbara knows, I have done a good bit of research in Sweden with the Ethnography Museum there and with the Sven Hedin Foundation. I'm a good friend with the director there. They've translated some of my stuff. I've read all the Sven Hedin stuff. I just want to, your distinction between the two is very good. I mean, in broad strokes, but he didn't kill anybody on his trips. He was rough and ready. He was making maps. But the idea that men that crossed these areas where there was no map at all, even going back to Xuanzang in the 7th century, how do you get there? You follow the bones on the side of the road. That's how you get there. The animal bones, the human bones. And I think that the people that worked with Hedin, who went, I think, 7 times, they knew what they were getting into. That was their job. And I'll tell you, reading his books is such great adventure, but it's a story of dead animals. There's no question. By the end of it, he starts out with 125 animals and ends up with 18 or something. But that was the nature of the game. I don't think it's because he was reckless or because he was murderous in any way. That was the nature of the game. And he was one of the,
understand.
You know, he was a real cartographer. He really went into uncharted territories and made the charts.
I completely agree. But in the context that when you compare him to R.L. Stein, who mapped things out, like really planned it out. But what I do admire, the one thing I love about Sven Hedin, I'm sure you came across, I think Jack will like this as well. The rivers popped up right and left in China when the glaciers came. At one point, he was floating down one of the rivers and he was playing on his gramophone, I kid you not, Carmen. He loved opera. And I started laughing to myself. He should have played Turandot so the Chinese could hear ping pong and say, that's you. And they'd be like, no, it's not. So then, you know, the Chinese opera idea and the Italian opera ideas are so different. I like that about Sven Hedin. But a lot of people killed. Sorry? What year was he playing Carmen? He would have been traveling around the same time, right? 1902, 3, 4, around that time. Those are the times that they all went through, all the way from 1902 to
the first complete recording of Carmen was done in 1908, and it was in German.
So all of them he would be playing around that time. So 2, 4, all the way to 14, 15. Sven Hedin lived a long time after that. And he also he had a lot of theories. There's pictures of him with, isn't it with Hitler? And Hitler wanted to talk about yogurt because Hitler thought yogurt was going to keep him alive forever. It's really fun reading about these people. They're interesting.
I think in terms of expeditioning. I traveled with a British colleague for
Oh, wow.
20 years. We stopped as far as we could. We stopped and had tea every afternoon, no matter if we had to do it with water and dirt. We stopped and did it. But certainly Stein traveled with tables and china and suits and dinnerware. And they traveled, Roy Chapman Andrews.
They dressed for dinner.
They dressed for dinner. And Roy Chapman Andrews, when he was describing how to design an expedition, has this great advice: brook no hardship. Don't plan for problems. You're going to have them. Plan for dinner. Plan for comfort. Don't plan hardship. And I really took that to heart. It's really good advice to how you go about. And part of an expeditionary thing is going into something unknown, going into
a book I highly recommend.
What is that?
Is this one. And I was reading.
What is it? I can't see.
It's Life Along the Silk Road.
Well, put it in front of your camera, Barbara. You're holding it off camera. Thank you.
Who is it by?
Susan Whitfield.
Okay.
And it's like the Canterbury Tales. So it's all annotated. Everything's true, but she creates stories. And the first one I read is about a monk, his horse, and his assistant, and they encounter a sandstorm. I mean, they have joined a merchant's caravan, and you can hear the winds, the sands swirling. And when it was over, I opened my eyes and was utterly shocked to be in Chicago. So I highly recommend that book.
There are some other books that are fun for reading, just fascinating to read. There was a trio of 3 women, the Gobi Desert, Dawn French, they were missionaries. I didn't put it in the reference because there's only so many books I can put in there. It's a wonderful book. They were missionaries, they were women, they weren't really accepted by the church. They cobbled some money to went a trip on their own. That book is very interesting because they can tell things from the woman's point of view because they got access to the homes of the people because they were women. So that book is a fabulous read. It's a very fun read. And there are many women travelers during these times. And just like Barbara, I love the fact that you traveled through Afghanistan. There's a woman called Ella Mayard. She traveled as a photographer. Oh, are you okay?
Oh,
I'm telling.
Oh, sorry. It's called the Gobi
Desert. Book.
It's called the Gobi Desert.
The Gobi Desert is Dawn French and her sister and another missionary. They were definitely substantial when they traveled, but the stories they impart of the travels that they made, because they could go into the homes of people because they were women, it give it from an entirely different point of view. But the reason I'm mentioning Ella Mayard, there were many intrepid women travelers. Ella Mayard, for example, she was forced to travel with Ian Fleming's brother because they wouldn't allow her to travel on her own. She didn't want to travel with him.
James Bond's brother?
Sorry?
With James Bond's brother?
Yes, that's right. That is correct.
But who was the woman she also traveled with?
That French woman, very delicate. She died very young. I forget her name. She was a beautiful, very wealthy Austrian woman who went against her Nazi family. But that woman committed suicide later. Her name will come to me. She took her under her wing and she traveled with her later. But initially when she traveled with Ian Fleming's brother. And they were both journalists. And so you have some marvelous pictures of her playing soccer or football with the guards in Srinagar and Kashmir. And that's how she won acceptance. Intrepid to the bone. It's really fascinating what one finds out. I love this stuff.
What was the name of the color book you were touting?
Color book?
You just brought a color book when I was asking about Orange. What was the name of that book?
Oh, sorry. Oh, fabulously fun book. It's by Victoria Finlay, Finlay. She's
written quite a bit.
Yeah, Color, Colour.
And that's all it's called, okay.
Yeah, it's simply called Color. Travel through.
Have I mentioned that I collect books on color?
No, I didn't know that.
Know that.
If you like, I'll send you some of the websites that I access. They have great ones. There's great websites from the Fitzwilliam Museum, and I'll forward it to you because they are pretty much zoned down to how do you discover color paint. Mara had asked me, how does one make paint? So I went and researched some really nice connections. I'll forward them to you if you like.
Say that again. The Color by Victoria Finlay.
Finlay, Finlay. It's a very simple, it's very cheap, and it's very informative. I loved it. It's a fun read. Color.
Well, I'm seeing Color, A Natural History of the Palette. Do you suppose that's the American
Might be because I bought this when I was in India. I was.
Oh, wait a minute. There it is. Colors Travels Through the
Box.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, got it. $178 in hardcover.
I think it was $15 when I bought it. Yeah, Diane?
Oh, I have a question.
Stop collecting books.
I have a question about the Black Hours.
Yes.
So you said there was a limited edition. I'm wondering how long it took to make each book, and also who did they feel that the audience was going to be for that book, and do you believe that it was actually used, or was it just collected as a piece of art? But do you think that some of the people that own them actually use them for prayer?
Yeah, so I can go and find out for you how long it took to make. So it was made by a Flemish artist. I had the name, it's in my notes, but it was actually made for use. They made it black because to depict the suffering, black is a mournful color. That's why they made the background color black. Mm-hmm. They use black and gold for the gilding to make it pop out. And it has a very restricted palette. Blue, some very rare, like an old rose color. It has a very, so you put in, this is done in the Dutch times. So the Calvinist mindset, they had a very less flowery than the Catholics and and all that ilk of Christianity. It was dipped in that iron copper solution to give the black background. But what's happening, the black is flaking off. And then also because of the copper, which also creates that green in the Islamic books to be corrosive, it's very corrosive. It wasn't that it was made in a limited amount. It's just that only 7 of them survive because they just corroded through. I will find out how long it took to make. But it was made by my notebook's in the other room. I have the name of the guy that this is credited to.
Also, if you know the number that they did, the edition that they did, that would be interesting.
I will look it up.
Sort of like we're used to make black dye for carpets. That as they were very corrosive, the black pigments, and often you see in old carpets the black or brown is corroded down and it almost looks like the rest of the piece is in relief, but that isn't the case. It's because the iron salts destroyed the wool. And occasionally you'll see a carpet where it's not. It could be a restoration, but quite rarely they use black sheep. But that is that was very uncommon. It's most corrosive. So to use these pigment, and they didn't know that. I mean, because they were using them and they had no foresight to see that in 100 or 200 years, that pigment would destroy the paper or the vellum or the wool, but you see that anyway. Not that it may, some of these colors, by the way, I don't know, again, I'm thinking about carpets rather than, but I have an idea that the natural dyes that they used to make pigments for paint were not all that dissimilar that they used for making color that they used for textiles. They changed over the years. I mean, they weren't color fast, some of them, and the oranges, I'm not saying they were, but there are color shifts where even without sun exposure, these things did not stay the same color over a period of centuries. They just changed. It's very interesting too, as a carpet aficionado, to look at Safavid, the decorations in the Safavid book. And of course you showed the Arbadol Mas carpet in the beginning of your talk, which is in London. it's interesting that the Getty version of it was actually used to, pieces of it were used to restore the one in London. I don't know if, because the Getty is actually a large fragment. It's not a complete carpet. And they actually used pieces of that carpet originally to restore the one in London. But they were a pair, clearly. But if you look at the decoration or the scrolling and the figuration, you see that in your books. They're right there. It's the same. It's the same thing.
Mhm.
Yes. Mara, you had a question? Oh, sorry, Sherry.
Two things. In the beginning, towards the beginning, you were talking about the Buddha.
Yes.
And it was the drawing where he's on the throne and he's barefoot and the two lions are there. He has a symbol of the Nazi cross on him.
Backwards.
No.
No. What was your second question? I hear the first one.
Okay. To make orange, you would start with cadmium yellow and add alizarin crimson.
What was the second thing?
Alizarin crimson. You start with the yellow, the cadmium yellow, and then you would add enough of the alizarin crimson to make the color you want. You can't go backwards because you'd never get it light. You have to start with the cadmium yellow.
Oh, fabulous. As far as the symbol is, that's the swastika, which is a very religious symbol in Hinduism. But the Nazi swastika you talk about points the other way. And that in terms of pure story, when Hitler comes into play, a lot of the Hindus, the priest said he will ultimately fall down because he's doing this. He's
doing it backwards.
Sacrilegious with that symbol, and it's going the wrong way.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yes, that does. It's a very sacred symbol to the Hindus, and yeah.
But
Sorry,
I've been with the Aryans in Ladakh, and they don't look like blonde Germans. So he got that wrong. Betty?
I was going to say that all of you are so interested in books. There was a book that when Soma and I were talking early on about her Silk Road research, there was a book that I read recently called Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, which is about travels on the Silk Road, but it's very poetic, and it is imagined stories between Kublai Khan and Marco Polo. And each time Marco Polo crosses the deserts to get into China, the Khan asks him to tell stories of his journey. And the book is short. It's maybe 100 pages, 110 pages, and each one is a little vignette of a story. And it goes from these...
link?
I'll just tell you that it's called Invisible Cities.
Okay.
You'll find it. There was a contemporary opera, for those of you who love opera. There was a contemporary opera of it made from it in LA by a group called The Industry LA, which is an avant-garde opera company here. It's quite wonderful. But that's a whole other story. But Invisible Cities, these stories start from this very lush descriptions of lush oases and fertile cities and commerce being successful through the whole life cycle, and it ends up being very desiccated in the story. So he's this little teeny poetic version of a life cycle of civilization that are told as these stories that Marco Polo is relating to.
Yeah, it's on Amazon, $9.99.
Oh, good.
I have it on my Kindle.
$19, I guess.
Or $8.98. There's a copy for $8.98. Shari, I have a question for you. Does that cadmium yellow and alizarin crimson, do they exist at the time are they old? Do they exist at those pigments at the time that Koran was done?
I would think so.
Yeah, okay.
I would think so.
You know, you see swastikas showing up in very strange places. I mean, we have in our collection a fragment of a Greek embroidery from the 17th century, and they have an intact one at the Art Institute. I mean, the entire, in which his swastikas are seen there, and you're wondering, what is that all about? I mean, why would a Greek Orthodox country produce a textile which has swastikas embroidered in it? So
they weren't swastikas.
Yeah.
I just got a text back, Shoma, That painting is in the Freer.
Freer Gallery. Thank you. I'll have an updated version on Thursday. I will say Betty Syed. Thank you.
Oh, no need for a footnote. Thank you.
Want to. You know a funny story about the swastika? Only all these IT technicians who come from India. So a friend of mine, they work for one of the engineering firms who brings programmers from India. So they place them all over the US to do programming, these consultants. So he was placed, this newly brought one from India was placed in Iowa. And per Indian habits, when he bought a car, this poor chap, he painted a swastika on the car because it was blessings. And then he drove around Iowa. This is about 2 years ago. So he's driving around and obviously gets pulled over by the car. He doesn't know what's wrong because he's got Ganesh inside and flowers inside. And my friend's husband, who is part of it's one of those Wipro companies, he gets a call in the middle of the evening saying, you know, I'm in jail. And so the guy had to talk to the police and explain, this dummy didn't know, this is just no go. And so he had to explain to the cops, he doesn't know what that represents. These are the things that lost in translation. They should prep these people who come from India. You can't do half of this stuff in here. I was laughing when I heard
that. You know, they're not real swastikas, but we don't, because they're turned around, as you pointed out.
Police doesn't know that, Joseph.
Oh,
yes.
of course.
I didn't know that.
They are different. They are different.
Yeah.
Yes, the police in Iowa don't know that at all. They're like, oh, what's this?
But most people don't recognize it. They see those interlocking cues and
yes.
And the swastika on the Greek embroidery that we have is not the Nazi swastika 300 years before Hitler. I mean, so it's a Buddhist symbol, but you wonder what the Buddhist symbol is doing in a Christian embroidery. But you never, who knows? I think that right now, it seems to me that that gentleman with the swastika on his car would be received quite well in certain parts of this country. So maybe just driving the right
Don't say that. Oh, there it is. Ah.
Yeah.
Aha.
A very old amulet box.
Very nice.
So is the swastika in the Christian document an early example of cultural appropriation?
Ah!
No.
I have an idea that these people, you know, when you look at the evolution of decorative objects, and I wouldn't say decorative objects, but what's embroidered or woven, sometimes the weavers don't actually know what they're weaving. I mean, they may, it's something that they've seen before, maybe their mother or their grandmother taught them to put that in as a design element. But in fact, I have looked at what looks like scrolling foliage in carpets. But if you go back 150 years to prototypes that are earlier, they actually aren't flowers or they're not vines. They're actually animals with long tails. And you can see by looking at various evolution of the design that that's exactly what it is. And on one of the pieces that we've examined, you can actually carefully see the feet of the animals, which seems to be attached to a vine. But if you go back 100 years or 150 years, it was actually an animal rather than a vine. Anyway, so it's all very interesting and inexact because we don't have the science behind it. Michael and I are going to have to go.
I just want to say one thing.
Go ahead.
I think it is probably a good example of attribution because there's I think Hinduism is so inclusive, and you think it's a spiritual sign of spirituality in Hinduism. So I think it probably came into Jainism, it probably came into Buddhism through Hinduism. So why wouldn't it come into Christianity the same way?
But you know, there were these sacred symbols that are very ancient.
Yeah.
And at one time they
They're in here.
They weren't attributed to Hinduism or Judaism or whatever. You see the Star of David everywhere around the world. You see them in cathedrals. You see them. It wasn't until really, really recently that it was kind of attributed to specific religions. Everybody borrowed from these ancient symbols, and they have an energy to them, and people felt that energy.
I think there's a certain sameness when we get to a certain level. It's like what Soma was talking about, the tales, the traveling of the tales. And you see like the three wise men. I mean, all these different, different reiterations of, you know, the same story.
Even the cross was used with everybody used it.
I don't know if any of you are deeply involved with the 2,000-year-old man, because
of course,
Mel Brooks and
Carl Reiner
did this interview of the 2,000-year-old man who has lived forever, has viewed history, and at one point Reiner in the interview asks about a profession, and you know, he used to make stars, and then he goes into the cross. He says, what's with a cross? I mean, you know, two men run at each other with pieces of wood, you've got a cross. He says, what did I know? I didn't know it was eloquent.
Yeah.
Barbara, Ruben, I have a question because I know you like modern art.
Bye, everybody.
Oh, bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.
Thanks, Soma.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Shoma. That was marvelous.
Thank you.
I look forward to Thursday.
Oh.
What time on Thursday?
4 o'clock. I'll forward the email. I was going to ask you, Barbara, what did you think of the Brancusi statue with the monkeys? Because I know you like modern art, don't you?
Oh, I think it's that Barbara. I thought you.
Sorry.
It over time, you see similarities between African. A lot of primitive art was copied or reappropriated by Picasso. It's really very interesting. Artists nothing's really new, is the way I look at it. It's just reinvented in a different way. Yeah. But so many artists would see it just a little bit differently. But when my husband and I were in Papua New Guinea, and I mean really in the jungle, these bowls and pots, Tom and I were staggered by the fact that Picasso just was exactly like it, but exactly. And over centuries, it's so common. Let's put it that way.
Reinterpreted.
Yeah, definitely reinterpreted. Nothing. I don't feel anything is new in that.
I think it's very Jungian with the universal symbols.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you were right. The Jewish star these are decorative things, decorative, and they're not necessarily. They weren't symbolic of anything other than the fact that they thought they were pretty. And there's only so much you can do with a straight line. There's only so much you can do with a circle. There's only so much you can do, with shape. And these things become common in design. I mean, what they were doing in American Indians, you would say that maybe was very similar to what was being done in Uzbekistan. You look at the patterns of the clothing when we were there, Barbara, and then you think of an American Indian, right? And then you think of what American Indians did. There was a great deal of similarity across cultures, and what was being done in Japan. I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright. If anybody was influenced with his architecture. I mean, you go to Japan and you look at those homes and you say, oh my God, you just saw Frank Lloyd Wright.
He did a lot of work there.
Well, but I'm just saying.
And in Baghdad, actually, the Shah of Iran had wanted to hire Frank Lloyd Wright. You can see the designs to redesign a new Baghdad. Could you imagine that? The setup
that would have been his father.
Huh?
Probably his father.
Perhaps. I thought it was.
Maybe not.
Can be wrong. So the
Wright lived
by Star Wars by George Lucas to design some of the Star Wars memorabilia. It's really Funny how
You
connections
want to
come.
hear something interesting?
Yes.
Supposedly George Lucas was very, very taken with Gaudi's sculptures in Spain, and he fashioned, in Star Wars, the guys with the white suits. If you see some of the Gaudi things in
Chimneys, yeah.
Oh my God.
Looks just like that face. Yeah, the chimney tops of those buildings looks exactly
And
like them.
Barbara, he was also influenced by Mongolian costume and jewelry because his princess, what was her name? Leia is absolutely Mongolian.
Well, her little
years.
No, I'll pull up the picture. And
I just want to quickly show Barbara Kipper something. She influenced me. When I saw her, she was wearing a face mask. So
good for you.
Oh,
wow.
Excellent.
Now you need you.
I couldn't stand the idea that it said face mask.
As if you can't tell. Maybe it's a
So all of you can buy flowers or whatever you want and stick them on. I bought this, what looks like Swarovski crystals, but they're not. To embellish this, so instead of my tiara for my birthday, I can wear this.
Let's see the crystals. They didn't.
Yeah, I didn't get that.
They're self-adhesive strips. They're self-adhesive strips.
Closer to the camera.
Oh. Do they come in color?
Yes.
Oh, well.
Also, washi tape does a great job too.
I have tons of that too.
Mm-hmm.
I love cut and paste.
I know you do.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, it was a delightful, delightful afternoon.
Wonderful.
And I look forward to our next meeting.
As
Sure.
always.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you,
So,
Cheryl.
as always, it
Oh,
was
next week,
Thank you,
speaking
Merle.
Silk Road, we've got Alexander interviewing his mother.
Ooh,
Oh, great.
that would be
Who
fabulous.
has a textile collection. I've been lucky enough to be in her house, and it's Aladdin's cave, and she's fabulous. She's also an astonishing cook, and I have her recipe for an apple cake she gave me, but I can't wait. So
It'll
anyway,
be fun.
Thanks for arranging these, Barbara. Look forward
I
to
know.
it.
loving it.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.